Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It is 4 p.m. ET, and you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze, and we are so pleased to see you. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 14 novels of suspense, including my newest book, which is called The House Guest, which is displayed on the door behind me, as I always do. And I will show you that I just received, look what came today, the advanced reader copy of One Wrong Word, my new book that comes out in February. And I am so excited about that. It is about greed and gossip and the power of lies. One Wrong Word. And we'll talk about that someday. But what I want to talk to you about today is this marvelous novel, Saving Emma by Allen Eskens, which is just out today. And Allen Eskens is here today to talk with us about this book. Let me just say, it is powerful and an engaging, wonderful story. And you know, when you hear people say, I just couldn't put it down, that is what this is. Allen is an amazing storyteller, and it comes out gorgeously in this novel about justice and family and faith and belief and truth and loyalty. So we will talk about that in a minute. But welcome to Allen Eskens, and happy Pub Day. This is the Pub Day for Saving Emma. Are you doing anything special for that?
I am. I'm going to Minneapolis, where I'll be doing my book launch at Once Upon a Crime bookstore up there. I tend to launch at that store because it's specific to mystery writers. But I have a lot of other events spread out throughout the state over the next couple months.
Brenda says Minnesota in the house. So we do have a lot of people from Minnesota. And if you are from Minnesota, please go to Once Upon a Crime tonight to see Allen Eskens and hear him talk about Saving Emma. But first, you will hear about it here first. But so do you have a book tour planned for the launch of this?
I do. It is a mixture of bookstores and libraries. So I'll do mostly bookstores between now and like the first week of October. And then in October, I have a couple weeks where I'm just going to be going to libraries, primarily in the southwest corner of Minnesota, and speaking at like 2 or 3 libraries a day over the course of a couple weeks. Then I go back to finishing up with bookstores.
You just saw my jaw drop when you said 2 or 3 libraries a day. How do you not have your brain be completely fried when you're doing that? How do you remember what you've said or not said?
Well, the thing is, I can say the same thing over and over and over again, and they don't know it. But I love talking to people. I love engaging with readers and having those discussions. I can go deep into the weeds on writing craft and storytelling, and I love answering questions. So it's really energizing for me to do that.
We will do all of that this afternoon here on Crime Time. And let me say, this is a marvelous, this is a perfect book club book. If any of you are in book clubs or want to start a book club, this is absolutely a marvelous place to start. There's so much to talk about this book. You have a wonderful quote from Kent Kruger, who another of your fellow authors from the same area, who says, one of our best crime writers at the top of his game, from William Kent Kruger, who is quite astonishing. And his newest book just made the New York Times bestseller list, and we hope this does too. What did you think when you read that endorsement? And what do you think good crime fiction is? What does that mean to you?
Well, my first thought when I read that was William Kent Kruger is one of the nicest men you'll ever meet. He's just a sweetheart of a guy, a true gentleman. My previous career I was a criminal defense attorney, and it's criminal defense attorney. Criminal law is all about arguing and fighting and bickering with prosecutors and going back and forth. And then I step into this world of writing and writers, and I meet people like, Ken Kruger, who is encouraging and supportive. So I can't say enough good things about that man. But with regard to mysteries, my philosophy from the very beginning with regard to writing mysteries was I wanted to have 2 plot lines. One is the mystery, the external plot line. What I mean by that is that's the mystery to be solved. That's the thriller. That's the chase. And I outline that from beginning to end. And then I go back and I ask, what is this story really about? And I want to have an internal journey. I want to have family dynamics like I have in this book, or larger themes such as in Nothing More Dangerous, a kid coming to understand his own racism, or you know in The Life We Bury, a brother trying to deal with the guilt of leaving his autistic brother behind. So I want to have those deeper themes in my stories, and so I do a second outline with that storyline. Then I work to mesh the two together and write a novel.
And you do that so beautifully in Saving Emma. There is the emotional, personal plot line as well as the plot line of the Innocence Project and whether someone is actually guilty or innocent, which is marvelous. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you do it, the key of that and the key of making that successful is to not make it feel to the reader as if there are two things. That each thing has to depend on the other. Talk a little bit about that braiding of that together.
I do a lot of podcasts that are screenwriter podcasts, and I can't remember who it was, but there was one that was talking about when you're outlining, try and avoid this happen and then this happen and then this happen, but instead focus on this happened, and because of that, this happened. And then that forced this to happen. And so everything has a causal effect as you go through this novel. So, when you have the mystery story and the personal story, they have to intertwine. One has to affect the other in a strong way. So there's a character in the story named Elijah who believes himself to be a prophet. He is convinced he talks to God. And that's the man that Bodhi is tasked with, looking into his case. Did this man actually commit the crime? But as the story goes on, Elijah, who's in this security hospital, which is the equivalent of a mental prison, he kind of becomes a mentor character in terms of it's those discussions that Bodhi has with him that start to settle in on Bodhi's thoughts and make him start to think about his relationship with his daughter differently. And so there's always that causal effect that you have between the two storylines where one's causing the other one or affecting the other one all the way through.
Yes, I love that. And I always think of it as sort of dominoes, that one domino of the story hits the next domino, which hits the next domino, and each thing touches each other and makes something happen because of something is really so valuable. Otherwise, the book is just episodic. And then, as you say, and then this happened and this happened. And it doesn't feel like real life, because real life is based on causation, whether we can recognize that when it happens or not. Let me let you know that you have found us at Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. A Mighty Blaze was started 3 years or so ago at the beginning of the pandemic by the marvelous powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us discovering new books and discovering new readers and talking about books and learning about each other and keeping together our writer and reader community. And we have persevered for this long, and we have absolutely loved it. And we have loved seeing all of you here today. I see Robin Stull and Catherine Holm and Mary Garrett and Pamela Fry-Priest. So many of you here today. Renee, thank you. And Randy, so much. It's such a joy to see you all, and such a joy to be able to introduce or tell you all about Allen Eskens if you know him already, and such a joy to introduce him to you if you don't know him. His new book is Saving Emma, which is just out today. And I'm going to, Renee says, someone I met on Goodreads suggested your novels to me last year, and I've been reading all of them since that time. Let me ask you, before we get to your bio, what do you think when you see that, Allen, that the reader community is buzzing about your books?
It's always astonishing to me. I did not set out to become a published author. I really just wanted to write for my own enjoyment. I started writing right out of law school, and I wrote for 20 years before I ever considered getting published. Partly because I didn't think that I had the chops to be a published author, but also in part, I was an attorney. I had a career. I didn't need a second career, but I just loved writing. So the fact that somebody else reads something that I've written and it impacts them, affects them, evokes something to make them tell their friends about it, that word of mouth is the greatest compliment a writer can have.
It's kind of weird, isn't it? That you put a book or we put a book out in the universe and somebody finds it and likes it and then tells someone else about it, just as Pamela Fry Priest is doing right now. It's kind of unsettling in a great kind of way.
It is unsettling in a very, very great kind of way, especially when you get that text, that email, that message saying, "You're my favorite author." It's like, okay, there are tens of thousands of authors out there. Are you sure? But it is so nice to have those kind of compliments.
But you know what that means, and you've done it so gorgeously in Saving Emma. And I know that starting today, because today is the debut of this novel, that you will start getting letters from readers who this book really touches, whether it's the Innocence Project or whether it's the custody battle or whether it's guilt or futures or past coming together, that you have written something that really touches people. I'm going to just introduce you so I can get that part over with. Let me just introduce you, and then we'll ask you very specifically about this book because I want people to hear all about it. But if you haven't met Allen Eskens, okay, you all, here's what's going on. They are building a house next door to us. And we'll talk about that another time. But nevertheless, today is the day that they are dumping gravel into the backyard. And they waited until 4 p.m. ET to do that, just so we would have some background noise. So forgive us all if you hear dumping gravel in the backyard. No one is burying a body underneath that gravel that I know of, although that's not a bad plot. Anyway, Allen Eskens is the best-selling author of 8 novels, including The Life We Bury and Nothing More Dangerous. His 9th novel, Saving Emma, comes out today, and you are hearing about it here first. He is the recipient of the Barry Award, Minnesota Book Award, Rosebud Award from Left Coast Crime, Silver Falchion Award, and has been a finalist for the Edgar Award, Thriller Award, and Anthony Award. His books have been translated into 26 languages. Allen has a journalism degree from the University of Minnesota and a law degree from Hamline University. After law school, he studied creative writing in the MFA program at Minnesota State University Mankato, as well as the Loft Literary Center and the Iowa Summer Writers Festival. Allen grew up in the hills of central Missouri. He now lives with his wife, Jolie, in greater Minnesota. And there you have all about Allen. And we are giving away, well, I'm not. I'm keeping this. Allen and his publisher are giving away a copy of Saving Emma. So put in your questions or comments or just general accolades for Allen and the book in the comment section, and we will spin the wheel of fun at the end of the show. You know how that works. And one of you will win. When Randy says, put that back up. Randy says, I just ordered a thank you signed copy from Once Upon a Crime. I live in White Plains, New York. And indeed, that's a good thing. Talk a little bit about that, Allen, that people can get signed copies from Once Upon a Crime.
Yeah, so I didn't know this before I became an author, but if you live in the continental United States and you want a signed copy of an author's book, go on their website, find out where they're going to be signing books, and you can order from most bookstores. We'll do this. Order from the bookstore, and before I go there to do my presentation, and they'll have set aside a book for you with whatever you want me to sign it, and I'll sign it, and they'll mail it to you. It's a wonderful service that they do.
It's interesting, isn't it? One of the joys of an author's life is to walk into a bookstore and they say, oh, here are the pre-orders. And there's stacks of books with little yellow stickies that say, to Pamela, to Renee, to Catherine, to Susan. And you think, these are people who took the time to want my signature and personalization on their book. It just fills your heart, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the odds of me, going to Boulder, Colorado in any given year to sign books is very low, or Santa Fe, New Mexico, or any town. But if you want to sign a book, you have the ability to get one from a bookstore where I will be doing a signing.
And we have put the link in the chat. Thank you so much, Margaret. You are fast. So, Allen, let's talk a little bit about Saving Emma. Tell us what the basic stories are, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the book is about as well.
Okay. The idea was born out of a case that I had when I was a young attorney. I used to take cases at the security hospital here in St. Peter, which is 15 minutes away from my home. And I represented a lot of people who were, there, committed as mentally ill and dangerous, different designations. But there was this one gentleman that I met with who was my client who believed himself to be a prophet. Now, this in and of itself is not unusual because that between 25 and 50% of people with schizophrenia will have religious ideations attached to it. But what was different about this gentleman was he was extremely articulate, very, very intelligent. And I sat in his room and we had discussions about the Bible. And it got me wondering about, I grew up 12 years of Catholic school, and we were told the prophets of the Bible were people who talked to God. But when you go back and read about Isaiah, for example, Isaiah preached for 3 years naked. A prophet named Balaam talked to his donkey, and the donkey talked back. And I just started wondering, if we believe that prophets existed back then, why would we not believe that prophets exist today? And that was my defense for this gentleman that I took before my judge, who I knew was a fundamentalist Christian. And the judge complimented me on my creativity, but then ruled against me. But that guy stuck with me. And so I always wanted to write a story about someone like that. And so Saving Emma kind of operates on three different levels. On one level is the external plot. Did this man kill the megachurch pastor? Because if he didn't, he shouldn't be in the security hospital. The second level is Bodhi is struggling as a guardian for this young woman named Emma. And he's struggling with his role in her life. Is he her father? Is he a guardian? His family's falling apart. And he's struggling to try and save his family. But the third level is these conversations that Bodhi has with Elijah, this man who's in the security hospital, who believes he's a prophet, going back and forth on the topic of different religious ideas and notions. That was really the fun part of writing this novel, in terms of it doesn't come down on one side or the other of the argument. It's just a dialogue going back and forth. But over the course of that dialogue, Bodhi takes away some important lessons from Elijah.
And I do want to talk about the external plot and about Emma as well, but just focus on Elijah and Bodhi for a second, because it is so unique. Elijah's voice is so unique. The structure of the novel is so unique with these conversations, which somehow you've managed to use them to propel the story forward. They are absolutely riveting and page-turning and thought-provoking. And Elijah is I don't want to say slippery, but a difficult person to talk to. He never quite answers a question. He talks in Bible verses. And Bodhi is forced to sort of dissect and see whether there's any truth in them underneath what he's saying. Talk a little bit about, if you can. I mean, I don't know how you did that, because there's so many layers in each thing that Elijah says, and then you gradually watch Bodhi begin to learn to decipher it.
Yeah. So one of the fun parts, and I'm sure you know this as well as I do, Hank, of being a writer, is you get to walk around in the shoes of your characters. And so before writing Elijah, I always spent time writing biographies of my characters and understanding them. So I really wanted to know who he was. And at his core, he believes he's a prophet. And so I just daydreamed, if I were Elijah and I believed I talked to God, how would I address people who spoke with me? And what came to me was Elijah sees the world in terms of he knows what's going to happen because God has already told him. He has no fear. He has no hesitation. He knows secrets that may or may not be true, and he doesn't care what people think of him because he talks to God. So you have Bodhi coming in, who has a very um, difficult relationship with religion because of his past. And those two clash, but at the same time, they're not really clashing because they're both headstrong. I would say Elijah's not even headstrong. He's just so comfortable in in who he is. He doesn't care what Bodhi thinks. He doesn't care about the legal system. He doesn't care what's happening to him. He has complete faith. So it was really fun just to walk around in that kind of character's shoes for a while.
I mean, you've written about Bodhi before, and it's interesting that everything that you were listing that Elijah has, no fear, no hesitation, no guilt, he knows that there's a reason for everything, is exactly the opposite of how Bodhi feels. He is fearful, he is guilty, he is hesitant, he is worried about the system and what will happen in the future. And it's such a great juxtaposition.
Yeah, but at the same time, Bodhi considers himself superior in that regard to Elijah going into the story, and part of the fun was to teach Bodhi the lessons that Elijah needed to teach him.
And it's so poignant and so touching throughout as we watch Bodhi change, especially since in another part of the story, Bodhi's dealing with he and his wife are godparents to a young girl named Emma, who came to them through some circumstances. And Bodhi has some guilt about that and some powerful love about that. Talk a little bit about those circumstances, of course, without giving anything away. We're talking about saving Emma, and right now we're talking about Emma. So talk about her role in this story.
Okay, so I write about a community of characters that I created primarily in The Life We Buried, my debut novel. Bodhi Sandin had a small role in that novel, but Bodhi Sandin also, at the time, existed in a manuscript that I'd written about a 15-year-old boy. So I knew who Bodhi was as a 15-year-old boy. I knew who he was, as an adult. And in my novel, The Heavens May Fall, Bodhi, that's the precursor to this novel. You don't have to read that novel to read Saving Emma, but it's the precursor in terms of how, Emma came to be with Bodhi. And Bodhi is just completely insecure in terms of how he understands his relationship. He feels guilt, and because of that guilt, he makes mistakes in his relationship with Emma, and those mistakes that he make lead to the family breaking down. Where if he'd just been honest with himself and honest with Emma, that wouldn't have happened. But he thought he was doing the right thing, but it kind of blew up in his face, and then he has to try and figure out a way to repair it.
And there's so many references of thought they were doing the right thing in this book, that so many people are doing things out of wanting to be good, and then it doesn't turn out that way, that they make a mistake in their decision, but based on benevolence. Talk a little bit about that and how all of our lives can be like that.
Well, the saying is true: the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And another cliche is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So Bodhi has always been someone who, at his heart, has always had good intentions. Execution has never been his strong suit. And he's a character who he is most like me in terms of how I developed as a human being. Nothing More Dangerous, when he was 15 years old, that's kind of who I was when I was 15. As an adult, he's an attorney, he's a law professor. That's kind of who I became after going to law school. And I'm always filled with self-doubt. I'm always, is this the right thing to do? And I think that comes out in Bodhi, especially. The other characters in the novel are they're more secure in who they are and their decisions. But I think Bodhi carries with him a level of insecurity that you would not expect a law professor to have. And it's primarily because of, Emma. He just doesn't understand how to deal with a 14-year-old girl.
It's interesting though, because someone who is insecure also means you could look at it, you could cast that as thoughtful, someone who can see both sides of the story, someone who weighs judgment. And that takes us to, and also someone who's looking for the right thing and isn't so set in their ways that they are blinded to the rest of the world. Let's talk a little bit about, I mean, I was trying to think about what genre this book is, and there is a thread of it that's a legal thriller, just a thread that's a legal thriller. Let's talk a little bit about that, about the Innocence Project and what Bodhi's case is. And somebody was asking about what was the story that was the precursor. Asks Randy, which book is the precursor where we meet Bodhi? Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, that's The Heavens May Fall. It's a case where Bodhi's on one side of a case. His friend Max Rupert, who's actually the protagonist of the story, is on the other side of the case, and they go against each other. And that's where you see Bodhi for the first time in Life for Barry, but it's a very small role. But you see him; he's kind of a co-protagonist, but secondary to Max. This is his first starring role, so to speak.
And you can easily, I mean, this is a standalone. I would characterize this as a standalone in every way. There's a little backstory that you tuck in so carefully, but this is definitely a standalone. So Bodhi has a case, has taken case, and that's interesting too. Talk a little bit about what that is.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about doing a case where my protagonist works for the Innocence Project is that the case has already been investigated. There's been a trial, and I lace the novel with transcripts from that trial. So Bodhi will meet with a witness or a character and ask them questions, and then the next chapter will be the transcript, a partial transcript from the trial, where I'm telling the reader, here's what Bodhi knew going into this interview. Here's what came out during the trial. So unlike most procedurals or legal thrillers, rather than have Bodhi doing the investigation from scratch, he's going back and trying to find holes in a previous investigation. And without the transcripts in there, I think that'd be very hard to do, because there's been whole trial already, and that happened, and I need to let the reader know this is the information that the trial heard. Here's what Bodhi finds out that's a little different. But it was a lot of fun writing from that perspective. Being a criminal defense attorney, I have great respect for the Innocence Project. Bodhi was featured in The Life We Bury because I needed an Innocence Project character in there. He goes into this trying to find out, did Elijah kill this megachurch preacher? And there's all these things that were hidden in the initial investigation that start to come out. And once one thread is pulled, that leads to another one, and then that thread is pulled, and then the whole thing starts to unravel. But it was a fun one to write.
Yeah, I love that. It's so authentic and so wonderful and so much fun as a lawyer, I bet, to be able to put the evidence in that you want to be in and leave the evidence out that you want to leave out. So you get to create the baseline for what Bodhi will investigate, and then allow him to find new things, which is so much fun. The idea of guilt and innocence and faith and belief is so intertwined in this story. The idea of searching for justice overlaid with guilt. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of thematically and how you wove that into the story? And then we'll get to a couple of, we have so many questions. That's great. Talk a little bit about guilt and faith and justice and storytelling when it comes to all those.
Well, I went through 12 years of Catholic education when I was growing up. And then upon leaving home to go to college, I started researching on my own and trying to do my own understanding of the Bible and things like that. And there is so much more to the Bible than what I had learned in Catholic school. but I really wanted to have that conversation. And what kind of inspired me was Galileo. When Galileo proved that the Earth orbited the sun, the Pope at the time tried him for heresy because, according to the Bible, the sun orbits the Earth. So rather than come right out and say, "Hey, guess what I discovered?" he did a dialogue. So he wrote this dialogue between a religious person and a science person on, putting forth each of their propositions in the best form possible. And then the idea was, I'll let the reader decide which one's right. So I kind of wanted to do that with regard to the religious aspect. I have Bodhisandan, who, like I said, he's not religious at all, and you have a guy who is convinced he's a prophet, and they're in a small room talking to each other, and they can't help but delve into religion because that's what Elijah is all about. So that was at the very heart from the very beginning of what I wanted this book to be. And then this is my most Agatha Christie-esque novel in terms of, I have this reveal scene where you find out, what happened. And I've never done that before, but it was a lot of fun leading up to that and having that scene in there. And actually, if you have a strong understanding of like the Bible and religion, I have laced the novel with clues that are religious clues that if you see them, you should be able to figure out the answer based on the little Easter egg clues that I laced in the novel.
Oh my golly, I am so tempted to ask you what one of them is and to see if I found them, but I won't. I will stay away from that. When I look over here, you all, I'm looking at your questions and your comments. Margie says, I cannot wait to read your novel. I think that is absolutely what everyone is saying right now. There are the names of people. Some of them seem to be extremely carefully chosen. Is there a way you can talk about that at all?
So when I chose the names, they were very specific names from the Bible. But if I tell you any more,
Right, exactly. Let me just say, nothing is what it seems in Saving Emma, and yet everything is what it seems in Saving Emma. And that is one of the things that makes this book be so absolutely marvelous. I have a million more questions, but we have so many questions in the comments that I would love to get the readers involved with this. Margaret, if we could put up some of the questions, I would love to take those now. Thomas says, new reader, where is the strangest place that an idea for a book came to you? And was the idea as strange as the place? That's a good, fun question.
I never go to strange places, but ideas come to me in different ways. So the book I'm writing right now, I was sitting in my living room waiting to go to an event, actually a library event, and I was watching a movie called The Reader. And I love stories where there's a character who you think this person is a certain way, and then midway through the story, something happens, and all of a sudden you see them in a different light. So The Reader is a movie about that. It's a woman. This is a spoiler, so not a big spoiler, but this woman's having an affair with a younger man. And so you see her in a certain light when she's having this affair. It's Germany in 1950s. And then she gets arrested because she was a guard at a women's prison concentration camp. And it's like, oh, wow. And now all of a sudden you see her differently. So I get in my car and I'm going to this event and I'm daydreaming about this movie. And I'm thinking, if I were going to write a story, what would it be? And by the time I got back from that event, I had the book I'm writing right now, half outlined already to go, because it jumped off the page at me. My protagonist is a middle-aged librarian here in Minnesota, and she is someone who just kind of blends into the background by design. She wants to, and the kids call her the sweater lady, but she came of age in Bosnia in 1995 during the war, and she was this very fierce young woman when she was 17 years old, and her past catches up to her, and it forces her to go back and find that person she was when she was a warrior in Bosnia. So that's the story I'm writing right now. But that's
all that from another place, from a place that just, again, as we were talking about causality, everything just touched a domino in your dominoes went off another way.
I asked a simple question of myself: if I were going to write a story with a female that had a tragic or interesting or fascinating backstory, what would it be? That was the question that I was in my head when I got in my car. When I got back, I had a story. So
you have to say, Sue Grafton used to call that the magic. You have to kind of say thank you to the universe for sort of downloading that idea in your brain. I'll answer Thomas's question also. I was doing an event, and I got the graphic for the event for the house guest, and the bookstore had gotten the title of my book wrong, which is like critical, gotten the title of my book wrong. And I looked at that title, which I won't tell you how they had changed this. I looked at the title and I thought, that is not my book. That would be a book about, and then I thought, yeah, that would be a book about the thing. And that is what I'm writing right now, because someone made a mistake in my book title. So you just never know, Thomas. And that's
and the thing about when you're a writer, you're open to that. When I was a lawyer practicing law, my head was so full of legal arguments and stuff that these ideas, they would bounce off and I wouldn't even give them a second thought. Now I mishear a lyric in a song and it's like, oh, that's a story. There's stories all around me.
That's marvelous. Yes, I completely agree. That is the magic. That totally is. Who else has a question as we wrap up? Kim says, hey, Kim, did you have any experience with the Innocence Project, or how did you research this theme?
I personally have not worked for the Innocence Project, but I did interview the director of the Innocence Project when I wrote The Life of Barry, and I interviewed the new director when I wrote this novel, because I wanted to see how things had changed in terms of I want to get things accurate. So I spent some time, understanding how the system works, whether or not a law professor could work, as do cases on the side for the Innocence Project and that kind of thing. But yeah, so I did interview the Innocence Project director, but I never worked for them. As an attorney, I was always too busy. And when I quit practicing law, I tore up my license, and I haven't been a licensed attorney for several years now.
My husband is a criminal defense attorney as well. I think, he's been a criminal defense attorney for 50 years, which is really amazing. So call us anytime for more. He's still working. He's still taking cases, still doing many cases, murder cases for indigent clients. He is just such a good guy. Who else has a question? What was the turning point that made you want to submit your book to agents to become a published author, says Sherry?
Well, I worked on the novel that became Nothing More Dangerous for 20 years. And that was my learning novel. That was me just, I would go take a class on writing craft, and I would go home and I'd, work it into my manuscript. But it was a piecemeal thing that over 20 years, it didn't gel. So I put it aside, and I wanted to keep writing because I enjoyed it. So I wrote another novel it took me 2 years to write it. And when I finished it, I thought, I think this is a novel. So I gave it to a couple friends and said, is this something that you would buy? And they said, yeah. So I decided to try and get it published just to see what would happen. But the thing is, I was rejected by 150 agents. And while I was getting rejected, I was writing my third manuscript. I was going to keep writing them because I was having fun just with the process of writing, just with the craft of it. And I was enjoying that. So whether I got published or not wasn't going to determine whether I was going to keep writing. Turns out I got an agent. It became a bestseller, The Life of Barry. And the rest is history.
Ongoing history.
Ongoing, yes.
You all haven't read The Life We Bury. It is fantastic. One of the very highest ranking novels in my little book brain.
Thank you.
life-changing and marvelous. So I've been a fan for a very long time. One last question, and then we'll spin the wheel of fun and give away the fabulous Saving Emma. I just picture you. Vicky is asking, I was going to say, I just picture you writing and writing and writing and writing as if you just love that you get to tell yourself a good story, to see what happens. But as that, Vicky is saying, apropos of that, do you plot extensively before you write?
Yes, extensively. So I use a sketchbook because I like the big white open spaces. So when I start a project, I've been daydreaming about the project for months, maybe years before I sit down to actually outline it. Then I sit down and I just start writing questions. Who is this person? What is, the seed of the idea? In this one, Bodhi gets a case. The guy thinks he's a prophet. So there's the seed. What was his crime? What's he like? And I just ask him tough questions and answer those questions. And over months of, 3 or 4 months of just percolating ideas, I will have put together an outline from beginning to end. Here's what every plot point of this novel is. And I will do biographies. So I know who my characters are. Even if it doesn't make it to the page, I know what is behind them. I have a big whiteboard that when the sketchbook isn't big enough, I then go to the whiteboard and I will outline using color-coded markers. This is this point of view, and this is this point of view in red, and this one's in green, and or time back and forth. This is what happens in Bosnia. This is what happens in Minnesota, and I'm very visual. So when I get it all up on the board, now there's my novel. Now I sit down to write it.
I hate the idea of it being a whiteboard. Do you take a picture of it so it's saved forever? You don't just wipe that away?
I leave it on the whiteboard until I'm done with the first draft. And I will go up there and I'll erase it and move things around. And that's the wonderful thing about having a whiteboard is I'll have the plot points, and all of a sudden I think, that plot point should really come after this one, because if it does, here's how, the causal effect is better. And I can just put little numbers. So this is chapter 1, this is 2. I can just bounce the numbers around, and then I'll it's like shuffling cards. I'll restack them, rewrite it with the chapter 1, 2, 3, 4 in order. Look at it again. Is that the best way to do it? And then as I'm writing, if I think this chapter should be moved, I can move it. Yeah, I outline a lot.
And here's my final question, and then we'll get to the wheel of fun. You have this nice outline, and that's great. And I lust for an outline. I would love to have an outline. I've never had an outline, and I want one, but I can't do it. But your book, these books are so emotional and so layered and so philosophical and so true. It's not like it's how do you then make this outline blossom into a big, rich story the way you do?
See, I think that's the beauty of having an outline. So when I sit down to write any given morning, I know the plot point that comes next. So I don't look at my screen and think, okay, what happens next in this novel? I know what happens next. And I will actually put on top of the page, for this chapter, what's at stake? Then I'll put the question, what's the desire? What's the obstacle? And the third thing I put is, what's the change in value? Now, the change in value is, again, a screenwriting term, but it's if my character goes into a scene happy, I want them to leave sad. Or if they go in questioning, I want them to have an answer. Or go in thinking they know everything, I want them to walk out questioning. I want them to change over the course of that chapter. So I put those 3 things on the top of the page and I answer them. Now I turn to my craft. What's the best way to start this chapter? Working on my prose and is there an arc to the chapter, and how do I end the chapter in a way that creates a question, profluence for the reader, that makes them want to turn the page and read the next chapter. And so rather than focusing on what happens next, I'm focusing on those technical craft skills and the writing style and the philosophical stuff that's in the middle of the plot points.
I hope that when this interview is over, if you have a moment, I know this is your big launch day, that you will come back and look at the compliments and the comments that are coming in the chat, because you are getting the equivalent in the chat of a standing ovation. for what you are saying. And I'm doing the same thing here, standing ovation. Thank you for this. As someone was saying, Renee, masterclass, Vicki Gregory, masterclass in writing and in this really phenomenal novel, Saving Emma. I saw that Kathy Lanigan said she's starting a book club and this may be their first book. So long. Isn't that so great? That's great. So let's spin the wheel of fun and see who will win a copy of Saving Emma. And I love this. I feel like I should hum or make some little music if I only played an instrument. And the winner is Kathy Lanigan. See, that's great. And you see that this is mechanical, or however this works, electronic. So we didn't make this happen. So Kathy Lanigan, long may your book club read Saving Emma, beginning with the copy that you will get from Allen himself. That just couldn't be a better winner, couldn't be a better winner. And we will put up how to find me, Kathy. I know you know. Allen, congratulations and happy pub day.
Thank you. And I wanted to pass on one more thing. When The Life We Bury came out, and I was talking earlier about how people in the writing community are just so wonderful. I will never forget the day that I was at some, it might have been Book Expo, I'm not sure, but you walked up to me and you said that you read my book and you thought it was so good, and you were so complimentary. And that, to this day, that compliment just meant the world to me. So thank you so much.
Oh my golly, what a wonderful memory. Thank you. That is so nice of you. You're bringing tears to my eyes. Thank you. And this brings tears to my eyes as well. The marvelous Saving Emma by Allen Eskens, who, golly, Kathy says, oh, I won last week. Someone else should be picked. Okay, Kathy, you are such an honorable person. But you know, you won. The Wheel of Fun made you win. It's something the universe wanted you to have this. Somebody else will win next week and we will make that happen. Well, we can't make anybody win or lose. That's how the world is. You win, you get this, take it to your book club, and that'll be marvelous. Okay with you, Allen? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Seems like
I'll get the address from somebody, I assume.
We'll the producer of the show will call your publicist and you'll be on the road, and that'll all get taken care of and everybody will be happy. And Kathy, that's really generous of you. Thank you. Yes. All right, you all, it's time to go. Kim says, go buy a lottery ticket, Kathy. I always wonder about that. You know, she already won. So why should she buy a lottery ticket? Because she's not going to win again. But that's just my theory of life. Anyway, quickly, you all, next week at 3:00, we will have Jillian McAllister, Just Another Missing Person, a fantastic book. She is a terrific author. Do not miss this. And then another amazing author and a friend of both Allen's and mine, I know, the fabulous Jess Lowry, who will be here at 4:00 ET with her brand new The Taken One. So do not miss that. Until then, Allen, happy pub day.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And all of you, thank you so much for joining us here today at Crime Time. We will see you next week at 3 p.m. And until then, remember, it is always safe inside a book. And we'll see you next time.